How many brew more than 10 times a year?
Oh yeah.
Woo! All right. I still brew 10 to sometimes 15, probably 13, 12 this year, because I like to do it. I really do. I keep it simple. Some of the pictures of me, the photographs of the complete joy of home brewing are some of my friends posing, but there's some brew systems in there that look pretty simple. Buckets, plastic buckets with fills, ladder system, twirly whirly, and siphon hoses. I love gravity. I don't like cleaning stuff if I don't have to, but you know, you do have to clean. And 5.5 gallon batches rather than 10 or 15 because I like to brew more often and have more of a variety. Put beer in kegs most of the time. My barley wines or stronger beers or maybe some lambic style beers I'll put in bottles because I'm not going to be pouring myself lots of pints of that for dinner usually, so, and they age pretty well. Little hint, if you age beer, if you actually put it in a bottle like strong beers and you think you can find a place to put it away and forget about it and you'll come back to it in a year or 2 or 3 or 4, who knows, dip it in paraffin wax. You know, just, you have your bottle, you put the bottle cap on, melt some paraffin, and it'll seal it, because even with the bottle cap, the air will ingress in. Talk about it in one of my books, I forget which one, but probably the companion, because it's a little bit more geeky. Not too geeky, but it's just a great way to, even if you buy good beer that's meant to age, you know, bottle caps, you know, air kind of creeps in and it'll oxidize. But if you paraffin wax it, now you talk to a commercial brewer and they say, it doesn't work, it can't work because, you know, it cracks and stuff. But you're a home brewer. Don't listen to all the commercial brewery knowledge, because you're a home brewer. You got to think about your situation. When you put a beer away, you're putting it in one place and it's not going to move. If you're a commercial brewer, you can't use paraffin because it's going to be on a truck, it's going to be cold, it's going to be warm, and the paraffin will stress and crack and the seal will be broken. If you really want to do it the way they should do it, you can get sealing wax, which is tougher. But, you know, that's my approach to home brewing, and especially the Homebrewers Companion, which is the Master Brewer's edition of the Joy of Home Brewing. It's kind of the second volume. I get a little bit more into the details beyond extended fundamentals, let's just put it that way, about just finessing your beer and little tricks of the trade or the hobby that you might encounter and have questions about. I was saying, you know, I forgot all about this. When I originally wrote the Homebrewers Companion in 1992, it was published in 94, so it's been 20 years since I really needed to update it. You know what I did? The premise of the whole book was I had this stack of questions that people had written to me for over 15, 20 years. How many are members of the American Homebrewers Association? Well, the Professor Surfite is me. And so I get over, you know, 30 some odd years of zymurgy, I've been answering questions. So I collected all those questions and I figured, what better way to address a kind of advanced edition of home brewing than to make sure that I can present answers to all those questions that existing homebrewers had over a period of 15, 20 years, and presented in a format that it was readable rather than a question and answer through the whole book. And I made sure every question was addressed in the original edition of the Companion. And of course, 20 years later, I learned a lot more stuff, so I needed revision. I reformatted the recipes and updated the more sophisticated hop stuff that's happening now that probably are, how many here are dry hopping their beers and into hop? Well, see, just like people weren't doing that 10, 15 years ago, and hop farmers didn't realize what they needed to do to grow hops and process hops so they preserve all those great qualities. So there's been a lot of changes in brewing, so that's why the revisions of both books happened, and I thankful to HarperCollins to have given me the opportunity to do both editions at the same time and cross-reference, so you'll see in the joy of homebrewing to say, well, for more information, see page 258 in the Homebrewers Companion. And that's pretty unique. You don't, it's not a normal thing that publishers don't even want to deal with that. And they got the courage to do it, and it's been a long process, and it feels really good to have these books out. And what else do you want? If you have questions, I'll be glad to answer.
How many people learned how to brew because of this guy?
You?
Yeah.
All right.
Transitively, I learned how to brew because of John, and John learned how to brew because of me.
I'm succeeding.
Yeah.
What's in your fermenter right now?
I have 2 beers in fermenters and 4 beers on tap.
All right.
Actually, five, and a mead, a ginger bark shack ginger mead. You know, how many have made here mead here? How many have made my bark shack ginger mead recipe? Nobody. But it's a recipe. It's a recipe that we used to brew all the time. And I went to, I live in Boulder, Colorado. I went to a neighbor's. He has a field of pumpkins and stuff. He has an annual pumpkin party for all his friends and stuff. And I brought a couple of big growlers of Bark Shack ginger mead. And this guy, Chet, and Christy took my beer class in the 70s, okay? And I told them, remember that mead? We used to make it all the time. It was like Homebrewers' introduction to the whole idea of mead. It's a sparkling champagne-like ginger mead. It's honey, water, yeast, and ginger. And it's sparkling like beer. So it's 8%, 8.5%, and it was a flashback to the past. And I hadn't made it myself for 25 years, and I said, I gotta do it again, because I visit homebrew shops like this one all over the country, and
We're the only one like this one.
Actually, you're right. And every once in a while, we get people say, "Here, try this, try that." And every once in a while, I get a Bark Shack ginger mead. I say, "Oh man, I haven't made that. I got to do this again. This tastes so good." So I did brew that. So, well, I mean, I've been talking. I had a beer for dinner. So it's kinda...
How many people remember the 70s?
Yeah.
There you go, John.
Yeah.
Is there anything along the last 30 years that you assumed was the proper way to do something, but was like, what was the biggest shock or revelation that came through the revolutions of homebrewing that kind of like countered some of your main assumptions?
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of things that shocked me. This whole thing with hops is all new. That's pretty interesting, but I wasn't thinking about that. Yeast. You know, one of the things that shocked me was I was able to keep yeast alive for not 10 years, not 20 years, but 25 years, and it would come back to life. And it would actually make good beer, just in a bottle of homebrew. And you read all the yeast books, and you're supposed to be dead after so long. After a year or two, you have to culture it. You got to give it proper treatment. You got to feed it. You got to do all the... One of my beers, Limnian Double Bock, which is a recipe, and I think it's my companion. It's about an 8.5% double bock beer, and I brewed that in. I remember the house where I brewed it, so I knew that, and I have the logs, but it was over 20 years old, 24 years old, and I cracked open one of the last bottles of that maybe 2 years ago. And as I was about to clean the bottle, the friend who I was shared it with said, "Are you going to see whether that yeast is still alive or anything?" I said, "Oh yeah, that's what I wanted to do." So I had some wort, and I poured it in, and nothing happened for 3 or 4 days. And after the 4th day, I saw a couple of bubbles on the surface. And then after the 5th day, there was a little bit more, and then it started fermented. I said, "Whoa, that's pretty amazing." 24 years in a bottle. So after it seemed to finish its meager fermentation, I poured it off and added more wort, and it took off. And I tasted it. I said, I might want to risk a 5-gallon batch because, you know, 5 gallons of beer is 5 gallons of beer. It's like gold, right? You don't want to blow it. So I did it, and it turned out great. It was amazing. And, you know, that yeast that back in the 1980s, all we could get as homebrewers was dried yeast, and it was crappy dried yeast. And it was lager yeast was ale yeast. It was just crappy. And I had been invited to brew a batch of beer for the Master Brewers Association in chapter in St. Louis, which was Anheuser-Busch. And so, oh my God, they want me to brew a beer for their meeting. And this is like '83, and I had friends at Coors, and they gave me a yeast out of their freezer, and they said, we can't tell you what this is, but it's good yeast, you know. Yeah, so I cultured it up from a little couple of drops of culture they gave me, and the beer turned out well, and I kept that yeast going and I kept it going through the procedures that I outlined in my Complete Joy of Homebrewing. No slants, no fancy-dancy stuff, just things that anybody in this room could do, and I kept it going and kept it clean, and kept it going, and it's now available from White Labs as Cry Havoc yeast.
Oh, is that Cry Havoc?
That's Cry Havoc. So turned out, no, and originally Coors wouldn't tell me what it was, but then I had one of my home brewing students who took my beer making classes in the 70s. He eventually got a job with Coors, and maybe you can find out, because I had the number 1173. Still had it on my bulletin board, because someday I'm one of those kind of guys that don't throw pieces of paper away sometimes. Maybe you can find what this is. 2 days later, he said, I know what that yeast is. He said, tell me. He said, well, you better sit down before I tell you. He said, why? I said, yeah, you better sit down. I said, okay. I sat down, he's on the telephone. He says, that yeast was original, and this is a yeast I've used for ales and lagers. Just temperature, I would make great. All the recipes are based on, most of the recipes in the books were used with that same yeast. That if I made an ale, I just fermented at a warm temperature. It's barley wines, imperial stouts, get fruity and have ale characters. And if it was a lager, I'd ferment them down to 35 degrees in lager room, and they tasted like lager. He said that yeast was originally cultured from a keg of Budweiser. I said, well, that yeast is probably the happiest Budweiser yeast that ever existed. Making all those kinds of beers, because I'm sure Anheuser-Busch would never use it to make those the kind of beers I made. So it just goes to show that. So you asked me the question, anything ever blow my mind? It's like, it's supposed to be this way, and it turned, you know, there's still lots of things you can learn from. The knowledge is great out there, but you know, you got to go with your experience. You know, other things, you know, when you get hop descriptors, what hops smell like, you know, they usually tell you, especially new hops, they smell like grapefruit, passion fruit. Well, those are farmers and people rubbing hops in the field and selling, oh, I can smell this, I can smell melon, I can smell orange. I put it in beer, and so it doesn't smell anything like what they smell like. A beer, fermentation, I mean, yeast interact, metabolize things in fermentation, it changes. So all my books, when I talk about hops and the character that they contribute to beer, particularly in late hopping and dry hopping, is from my own experience of brewing with them, not rubbing them in your hands and giving superficial information. So you know, it's like my books are based on experiential circumstances, my own and a lot of other people's. Wonder, I'm talking too much. I don't have a beer in my hand.
What do you want? Somebody give him a beer.
There you go.
That didn't take long.
Boom.
Yeah, somebody over there with a New York Yankees. Oh, he's got it.
Most homebrewers that I know at least flirted with, you know, however realistic or not, the thought of turning pro. Have you ever had that thought?
Oh yeah. People always ask me, what, you ever think of starting your own brewery? And I love what I do. and how I do it and how I'm involved. And you know, I wouldn't be here today if I had my own brewery, because I'd be having to tend to fermentation. I love teaching, I love writing, I like meeting lots of different people and kind of seeing all the fascinating ways that people make beer and do their business. Lots of different. I visit a lot of breweries too, and all the different beer business models and all the careers that homebrewers have gotten into. I mean, phew.
Like opening a homebrew shop.
Like homebrewing a homebrewing shop, or a small brewery, or a hotel, or a bakery, and I mean, it's like homebrewers are kind of the pioneer foundation. It's just so cool to go visit all these permutations of people's passion and enthusiasm. I love doing that. If I was making I'd probably enjoy. If I ever did open a brewery, pretty small scale, and selling a lot of beer wouldn't be a priority, and probably wouldn't succeed, because I probably wouldn't be able to stay in business. I'd have to be privately funded. Somebody. So, yeah.
Just curious. I've heard you answer a lot of beer nerd questions tonight. One of the ones that I'm interested in is, I've heard you advocate the use of cinnamon in the mash.
Yeah.
As an antioxidant.
Yeah.
Outside aeration. Is it a thing?
Probably is if you're it is if you're a commercial brewer. Hot side aeration causes you're putting oxygen, and you're developing precursors, things that will react later on in the life of the beer. And when your beer, if you're a professional brewer and your beer goes out in the marketplace, it's a lot more stressed than if you're a home brewer and you put it in your basement or in your closet or under the cabinet, and it's in one place and it doesn't move, does not on a truck, doesn't have giant temperature fluctuations, and you know when it's ready, and if it's starting to go, you drink it and you enjoy it. But if you're a commercial brewer, you want to stabilize the qualities of your beer, and hot side aeration might be something to consider. The cinnamon, it turns out, is I noticed that with my home brewed years ago, I noticed that when I put coriander in beer as a flavor, that the quality of the beer wouldn't go stale like some of my other beers. I forgot about them, I lost them in the bottle stash, and it's just kind of a curious thing that I noticed. And I was at a European brewing conference, and there was a Dutch professor talking about herbs and spices that were used in years past to put in beer, and some of it was for flavoring, and probably they noticed that certain things happen when you use certain spices. And so he talked about things, and afterwards I talked to him. I said, you know, I noticed with coriander that beer seems to be more stable when I use coriander. He says, that's true, because it prevents those precursors to happen. And he says, but what's even better is cinnamon. It's even better. It's more powerful. And then I talked to people who sell brewing aids to professional brewers, and there's the bark of a certain tree, quassia or something like that it's called, out of China, and they grind it up, and brewers can put a small amount, just like it's similar to cinnamon. It's this, you're a chemist, it's a high molecular structure, and basically it reacts with things in the beer and drops out protein and other things. It just takes it out, and they actually sell similar naturally occurring compounds to brewers to help clarify their beer.
Like,
And it's the same principles as coriander, but it's available if you want it to.
What's it called?
I can find out for you. But,
Does the cinnamon give cinnamon flavor?
no, yeah, the guy I talked to, one of the consultants for this company that was selling this root said, "Oh, if you use cinnamon, it's going to make your beer taste like cinnamon." I said, the amount of cinnamon you put in, and by the time it goes through the boiling process and the mashing process, it's gone. All those volatile oils are gone.
How much do you use?
Yeah, how much?
I'd say a half teaspoon.
I've had some of my homebrewing disasters in the past. What's like the worst thing that's ever happened to you in homebrewing?
Oh. Well, the things that come to mind are things that happen to you. You know, sometimes you kind of mishandle a glass carboy.
yeah.
You lose it. Oh, I can remember one that was just like, ooh, they should have taken a video of that. I live in Boulder County, and right by my house, there's a creek that flows. And actually, it did flood last year during the flood that we had there. But I would used to take my brew pot and put it in the creek. It would chill it down in 15 minutes. I mean, it was, flowing cold water from the mountains. Well, one day, several years ago, was the last time I ever did that. You can see what's coming. I was a half hour ago going to go check on the pot, and I said, "Oh my God, the water's all cloudy." There's a thunderstorm up in the mountains, and the water started rising, and I noticed that the pot was just starting to float higher than the ground that it was on, and literally, I ran down there. And as I went to reach for the handle, I was 3 feet away. It just went. There was no sound. There was no dramatic splash. There was no violent action. It just went. And my beer ended up in Kansas. So. I was so bummed out. I mean, I was so depressed after spending 4.5 hours of making this beer. I was so bothered. You know what I did? I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep that night, so I made another batch right then. So, because I would just be bugging me that I spent all that time and didn't get anything out of it, so I might as well double the time and at least get something out of it. So that was the most memorable thing I did.
You get style points.
Top 4.
The other one, I had Will's beer earlier, and I was really impressed. This lambic, 2-month-old lambic.
Yeah.
Wow! Holy smokes!
It's so young.
Yeah, and I'm from Colorado, so that's double meaning. It's for 2 months. It's phenomenal. It needs a little bit more time, and it would probably rise to the top. But so you'll know number one in a second here, because I'm going to knock out these two beers. The IPA, right? It's an IPA.
Yep.
And the Pilsner are really well made, balanced, timely beers. And by time I mean they're at their peak. It's not young, they're not old, it's just right. And they're both, the quality is equal on both sides. Though I think because they're both really good beers. The hop character. If he had pint-sized versions of this, I'd order 2 of them, but I can't do that. So the IPA is just this really well balanced, but the Pilsner is where I'm ending up, because Pilsners are harder to make because they need to lager, and you got to get those lager characters. And the finesse with the dry hop, you must have late hop or dry hop, because I get this beautiful hop character, Sauce or something.
Sauce.
Yeah, there you go. I got it. Really well done. And maybe in a month from now, it won't taste as fresh. But right now, it's where it's at.
Yay!
Got any more?
Regardless of whether the team whose baseball hat, New York baseball hat you're wearing wins, you can always be a winner.